Not as a man with no central bank, no army, no Fortune 500 balance sheet, and no legal claim on the global dollar system briefly moved through the world as if he had discovered a private entrance into it? That's the real question. Not how he bought watches. Not how he found victims. Not how he posted cars. Those are surface details. The deeper question is why the global financial system, which presents itself as credentialed, regulated, audited, surveilled, and institutionally mature, could be penetrated by a class of actors who did not control any of the institutions, but understood the points, where institutions stop being machines and become people. The public story of Hushpuppi is usually told as a morality play about arrogance. A man flaunts wealth online. The authorities notice. The luxury feed becomes the evidence file. He's arrested in Dubai, moved into United States custody, and eventually sentenced. That version is not false. It is just too small. The more serious version is that Hushpuppi occupied a position inside a distributed financial crime supply chain. Prosecutors said Ramon Olorunwa Abbas conspired to launder funds tied to online scams, including business email compromise schemes, bank cyber heists, and other frauds. He received 135 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay more than $1.7 million in restitution to 2 victims. But the sentence is the end of the movie. We are interested in the operating system. The operating system was not genius in the Hollywood sense. It was not a single hacker in a dark room defeating every firewall. It was modular. One person or cell compromises communication. Another manipulates the victim. Another supplies bank accounts. Another moves funds through jurisdictions. Another converts proceeds into luxury goods, passports, property, or informal value. Another provides local protection, credibility, or intimidation. The brilliance, if we can use that word clinically, was not invention. It was coordination. And coordination is the part people underestimate. The common American imagination still thinks of fraud as either primitive or corporate. Primitive fraud is the misspelled email from a fake prince. Corporate fraud is Enron, Madoff, FTX, mortgage securities, fake accounts, insider trading, accounting manipulation. Hushpuppi sits in the seam between those categories. He was not merely sending bad emails, he was attached to a cross-border capital conversion system. That distinction matters. A scam produces money. A laundering network makes the money usable. Those are different businesses. The scam is the front end. It extracts funds from a victim through deception. The laundering layer is the back end. It absorbs dirty value, breaks obvious ownership trails, places funds into accounts, moves value across borders, and transforms electronic fraud proceeds into things that can be worn, driven, displayed, pledged, gifted, or hidden. In legitimate finance, we would call this intermediation. In criminal finance, we call it laundering. Mechanically, the logic is similar. Match supply to demand across a network where no single participant wants to hold the full risk. So what was Hushpuppi selling? Not merely fraud. He was selling access to financial exits. That is the hidden product. Not the email, not the lie, not the watch. The product was the capacity to take value stolen in one part of the world and route it into another form before the victim, the bank, the compliance department, the police, and the courts could freeze it. The record described schemes involving a New York law firm, funds stolen from a Maltese bank, a British company and professional soccer club, and a Qatari school financing victim. Prosecutors also said he admitted that during an 18-month period, he conspired to launder more than $300 million, though much of that intended loss did not materialize. That last sentence is the key. Intended loss and realized wealth are not the same thing. Social media compresses them into one image. The audience sees the watch and assumes the empire is liquid. Prosecutors see intended loss, attempted transfers, bank accounts, device evidence, chats, counterparties, and intercepted flows. The Instagram image says, "I am untouchable." The case file says, "I am traceable." The machinery turns on a paradox. The more successful the laundering network becomes, the more it needs the real world. It needs banks, it needs payment processors, it needs travel documents, it needs luxury vendors, it needs telecommunications, it needs hotels, it needs airports, it needs jurisdictions with extradition relationships or security partnerships. It needs the very infrastructure it is trying to exploit. That is why the question of how they could have avoided the ending has to be answered carefully. I'm not going to give a criminal evasion manual. The operational answer is not useful here anyway. The structural answer is more devastating. The ending was not caused by one mistake. It was caused by the business model's dependence on recorded systems. The moment stolen funds touch regulated rails, the clock starts. The moment luxury becomes identity, the clock accelerates. The moment the organization scales across borders, the clock becomes international. The surface explanation is poverty. That explanation is lazy. Poverty matters. Weak labor markets matter. Youth unemployment matters. Currency weakness matters. Corruption matters. But poverty by itself does not produce global-scale cyber-enabled fraud. Most poor people do not run transnational laundering networks. What produces this particular form is the collision of three forces: global digital access, local institutional scarcity, and a world economy that pays far more for proximity to Western financial flows than for ordinary productive labor in peripheral markets. That is the uncomfortable mechanism. In a country like Nigeria, the gap between local opportunity and global aspiration can become violent in economic terms. A young person may have English fluency, smartphone fluency, social intelligence, diaspora awareness, and knowledge of Western institutional behavior, but no credible local path to convert those assets into income at the scale visible on Instagram. The legitimate ladder is narrow. The global status feed is wide. That gap creates a market for illicit intermediation. This is not unique to Nigeria. It is a recurring structure in peripheral economies connected to rich country payment systems. When a country is globally networked but locally opportunity constrained, the most adaptive actors search for arbitrage. Some create software companies, some build export businesses, some enter music, sports, logistics, remittances, trade, or crypto. Some discover that the richest target is not a person, but an institutional routine. Business email compromise is powerful because it attacks routine. The victim is often not stupid. That point matters. The victim is embedded in a process that already expects wire transfers, invoices, counterparties, attorneys, closings, vendors, urgency, hierarchy, and trust. The fraud succeeds when the attacker learns enough about the process to insert a false instruction at the moment when the institution is already prepared to obey. In the July 2020 charging announcement, the Department of Justice described business email compromise schemes as often involving unauthorized access to a business email account, blocking or redirecting communications, and using compromised or fraudulent accounts to trick personnel into making unauthorized wire transfers. That is not random deception. That is process hijacking. The criminal does not need to defeat the entire bank. He needs to defeat the narrow human moment where a payment instruction becomes action. Every institution has that moment. A law firm has it when client funds move. A school financing deal has it when fees are released. A soccer club has it when transfer payments or vendor payments move. A bank has it when internal systems, correspondent accounts, and authorization layers interact under time pressure. The hidden insight is that modern institutions are not protected uniformly. They are protected unevenly. The firewall may be strong while the paralegal workflow is fragile. The bank's anti-money laundering team may be strong while a foreign recipient account is weak. The executive may have two-factor authentication while a vendor mailbox does not. The compliance rule may exist while the exception process is informal. Fraud lives in exceptions. The second point is that global banking creates asymmetric visibility. A bank may see a transaction, but not the original deception. A victim sees the deception, but not the laundering chain. A local police agency sees a suspect, but not the foreign bank account. A social media audience sees wealth, but not source of funds. A luxury watch seller sees payment, but not predicate crime. Every actor sees a fragment. The criminal network profits from the gaps between fragments. That is why transnational fraud can scale from places that outsiders condescendingly describe as underdeveloped. The weakness is not technological backwardness, often the opposite. The advantage is boundary knowledge. These networks understand how rich country institutions behave at their seams because they interact with them from the outside. They know diaspora communication patterns. They know the symbolic language of Western business. They know which institutions use email as authority. They know which banks are slow. They know which jurisdictions are useful. They know which luxury goods can absorb value. They know status itself can function as a credibility asset. America produces enormous criminality. It just wears different clothes. In the United States, large-scale fraud often appears inside legitimate institutional wrappers: investment funds, exchanges, accounting statements, healthcare billing systems, mortgage origination, corporate procurement, public markets, nonprofit finances, private equity claims, crypto platforms. Sam Bankman-Fried was sentenced to 25 years after the FTX fraud, a case involving billions in customer funds, an American institutional wrapper, elite investors, political donations, and a legitimacy machine that looked very different from Hushpuppi's Instagram luxury feed. So the difference is not that America lacks this scale of deception. The difference is that American fraud often captures trust through institutional aesthetics. Peripheral fraud often captures trust through cross-border impersonation and capital routing agility. One wears a hoodie in front of venture capitalists. One wears a watch in a Dubai hotel. Both are performing solvency. To understand Hushpuppi, you have to stop thinking of cybercrime as a technical field and start thinking of it as a labor market. A labor market has roles. It has specialization. It has reputation. It has price discovery. It has trusted intermediaries. It has enforcement mechanisms. It has career ladders. It has apprenticeships. It has outsourcing. It has failed participants. It has stars. It has back office people no one sees. The public sees the star. The star is dangerous, but he is also a vulnerability. The star concentrates attention. The star converts hidden flow into visible status. The star becomes the mythological proof that the game works. He recruits without posting a job. He markets without naming the product. He advertises liquidity, taste, impunity, and access. He becomes a living prospectus. That is what the Instagram feed did. It was not simply vanity, it was signaling. In legitimate finance, a firm signals quality with office location, institutional investors, audited financials, regulatory registration, board members, and press. In illicit finance, a figure like Hushpuppi signals network access through lifestyle. Watches, cars, hotels, jets, designer clothing, proximity to celebrities, proximity to Dubai. The signal says, I can convert invisible flows into visible assets. That signal has three audiences. The first audience is the public. They provide attention, myth, envy, and cover. The more the story becomes celebrity, the less it looks like infrastructure. The second audience is the network. Co-conspirators, money movers, account suppliers, fixers, and aspirants can read the display as proof of throughput. The lifestyle says the machine pays. The third audience is law enforcement. This is the audience the performer forgets. Every object in the signal can become a timestamp, a location, a payment trail, a vendor relationship, a device record, a customs fact, a social graph, or a contradiction. The same image that recruits status can recruit prosecutors. The deeper historical point is that this form of fraud is not a break from globalization. It is one of globalization's unauthorized children. Globalization created cross-border email, fast payment expectations, multinational law firms, international school financing, soccer transfers, remote vendors, diaspora banking, shell companies, luxury portability, and a class of individuals whose lives are distributed across jurisdictions. It also created delays, blind spots, and responsibility gaps. Fraud does not need a failed system. It needs a system with mismatched speeds. Email moves instantly, bank review moves slowly, social trust moves informally, legal recovery moves painfully. International cooperation moves slower than the funds. Luxury consumption moves faster than forfeiture. That speed mismatch is the market. When prosecutors described the case, they did not describe one local crime. They described a case spanning traditional financial systems, digital communication, international borders, United States victims, foreign institutions, and cooperation with the United Arab Emirates and Dubai police. That is the system map. Now look at the phrase third world country through that map. Now, the phrase misses the point because the relevant unit is not the country. The relevant unit is the network position. A peripheral actor can be weak inside his domestic economy and strong inside a global fraud network because his advantage is not domestic capital. His advantage is arbitrage across institutional distance. He can understand Western payment rituals without being fully visible to Western institutions. He can recruit accounts in one country, coordinate with actors in another, target victims in a third, convert proceeds in a fourth, and display wealth in a fifth. That is not backwardness. That is networked asymmetry. The United States often sees fewer Hushpuppi-style figures because domestic criminals with access to American institutions do not need to impersonate the edge of the system. They can move inside the system. They can raise funds, bill Medicare, misstate earnings, manipulate markets, create fake exchanges, overvalue assets, or use shell entities under the language of business. Their camouflage is compliance theater. Hushpuppi's camouflage was status theater. Both are camouflage, but status theater has a shorter half-life. It produces heat. Let us separate the machine into layers. Layer 1 is victim selection. The best targets are not merely rich, they are process-rich. A process-rich target has predictable workflows, repeated payments, multiple authorized employees, counterparties, documents, time pressure, and a reason to trust written instructions. Law firms, real estate transactions, schools, banks, clubs, suppliers, construction projects, import-export businesses, and finance departments all fit this pattern. Layer 2 is communication control. The fraud works when the attacker can observe, imitate, interrupt, or redirect the flow of instructions. That does not require omniscience. It requires enough context to make the false instruction arrive at the right moment, in the right tone, with the right apparent authority. Layer 3 is payment redirection. This is where the fraud becomes financial. The victim must be induced to move funds into an account that the network can access or influence. The account may be in another person's name. It may be in a different jurisdiction. It may be controlled by a money mule, a shell entity, a compromised business, or a recruited intermediary. Layer 4 is laundering. This is the crucial layer. Once funds land, the network has to move quickly because recall risk is highest near the point of theft. Banks can reverse or freeze. Victims can report. Law enforcement can notify. Correspondent banks can hold. The money has to be broken, moved, converted, withdrawn, spent, layered, or passed through additional accounts. Layer 5 is value stabilization. Criminal proceeds are unstable. A stolen wire sitting in a bank account is fragile. A watch on a wrist is more stable in one sense, but more visible in another. A passport can be useful but traceable. A car is status, but also registration. Real estate is storage, but also documentation. Crypto can move, but can also generate blockchain evidence. Every conversion solves one problem and creates another. Hushpuppi's apparent wealth came from occupying or coordinating the layers after extraction. The public record repeatedly points to laundering, accounts, attempted transfers, fraud proceeds, and conversion into luxury goods. In the Qatari school financing scheme, prosecutors said funds were used for personal benefit, including the purchase of a $230,000 Richard Mille watch that appeared on his Instagram account. That detail is almost too perfect. The watch is not just consumption. It is a condensed financial instrument. It stores value, signals rank, travels across borders, and can be sold privately. But it is also photographic evidence, vendor evidence, shipping evidence, chat evidence, timing evidence, and motive evidence. The object carries the contradiction. Now we can answer the question of how they secured so much capital. They did not secure capital the way a bank secures capital. They did not underwrite loans, issue equity, sell bonds, or build enterprise value. They intercepted capital already in motion. That is the most important distinction in the whole lecture. A bank creates credit against collateral and expected repayment. A venture-backed company raises capital against future growth. A fraud network captures capital during transfer. It feeds on movement. It does not need to convince the original owner to invest in the criminal. It needs the original owner to believe the payment instruction is legitimate. That is why business email compromise is so economically powerful. It attacks money at the instant when it is already authorized to leave. The fraudster does not have to create trust from scratch. The institution has already created it. The fraudster only reroutes it. In finance, settlement is sacred. Once the instruction is authenticated inside the process, the machine wants to complete. That completion bias is exploitable. People inside institutions are trained to process, not to philosophically reevaluate every payment from first principles. Too much friction kills business. Too little friction invites theft. The institution lives between those costs. The criminal network monetizes the gap. This is why the story is not about a poor country defeating a rich country. It is about rich institutions outsourcing judgment to routine. The peripheral actor exploited the routine because he could see it as an outsider. The insider sees a normal day at work. The attacker sees a payment ritual. The takedown was not mysterious. It was the system collecting its own receipts. The hidden wiring of modern finance is that every serious transaction produces records across multiple institutions. Banks have records. Messaging platforms have records. Cloud services have records. Immigration systems have records. Luxury merchants have records. Hotels have records. Airlines have records. Telecom providers have records. Social platforms have records. Co-conspirators have records. Victims have records. Prosecutors do not need omniscience. They need overlap. Overlap is fatal. One chat matches one transfer. One transfer matches one account. One account matches one identity document. One identity document matches one trip. One trip matches one photograph. One photograph matches one object. One object matches one vendor. One vendor matches one payment. Once enough fragments overlap, the network stops looking decentralized. It starts looking like a case. The Department of Justice said a boss was arrested in Dubai in June 2020, expelled from the United Arab Emirates, and brought into United States custody. The FBI thanked the government of the United Arab Emirates and Dubai police for assistance. That is the other part people miss. Transnational criminals often assume jurisdictional fragmentation protects them. Sometimes it does, but the more visible and valuable the target becomes, the more incentive governments have to cooperate. Dubai is not a lawless movie set. It is a global commercial hub with strong reasons to avoid becoming synonymous with elite cybercrime shelter. The United States is not only a country in this story, it is the issuer of the dominant currency, the home of major victims, the operator of powerful investigative agencies, and a central node in global financial enforcement. The dollar system is a trap for people who steal through it. Not because it catches everyone, it does not, but because when it does focus, it can reconstruct the path of value with enormous institutional force. So how could the ending have been avoided? Not through cleverer concealment. That is the wrong frame and the unsafe frame. Structurally, there were only 3 non-criminal exits. First, never touch stolen funds. That is obvious, but analytically important. The irreversible mistake was not posting. The irreversible mistake was participating in the conversion of fraud proceeds into usable value. Second, convert the same social intelligence into legal intermediation. The skill set is real. Cross-border trust, persuasion, luxury market literacy, diaspora networks, payment awareness, status construction, and platform growth. In a legal form, those become brand building, high-ticket sales, import-export, entertainment management, luxury brokerage, fintech compliance, diaspora remittance products, or fraud prevention consulting. The tragedy of the criminal path is that it turns monetizable intelligence into prosecutable evidence. Third, reduce the status machine before it becomes identity. This is not advice on hiding crime. It is a warning about psychology. When status becomes the operating model, the person can no longer exit quietly because the audience has become part of his balance sheet. The watches are not accessories. They are investor relations. The feed has to keep proving the myth. The myth requires new money. New money requires new risk. Risk creates records. Records create the case. That is the spiral. The final answer is this. Hushpuppi did not discover a way around the global financial system. He discovered a way through its human seams. He understood that rich institutions move money through trust, habit, hierarchy, urgency, and incomplete information. His network monetized those seams at scale. But the same system that made the fraud scalable made it prosecutable. Banks, phones, vendors, passports, platforms, and jurisdictions do not only move value, they remember. That is why the image of the Instagram billionaire was always unstable. He was not living outside the system, he was living inside its audit trail.